The CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code was developed to help property developers increase the energy efficiency and the upgradability of their building projects. Energy savings help offset the potential higher cost of building your home to code. And enhanced upgradability helps commercial owners increase their competitive advantage, saving money over time. Additionally, lower energy demands during and after the building process can also lead to community and national level benefits like reduced reliance on fossil fuel generated electricity across the construction industry and in homes, lower national fuel import bills, which can free up funding for other critical areas of investment, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So do the maths, play the long game, and help build towards a better future today. For more information on the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, visit energy.crosq.org.
Good morning and welcome to one and all to the CARICOM Regional Energy Building Code in a Snapshot virtual town hall meeting. Mr. Derek Omar, CEO of CREEBC, Mr. Elson Jordan, the Finance Manager of CREEBC, the representatives of CARICOM Energy Unit and CREEBC, directors, and colleagues within the CREEBC network, heads of organizations, heads of private sector agencies and businesses, media personnel who are present, and of course, not forgetting you, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you again to the CARICOM Regional Energy Building Code Snapshot Virtual Town Hall Meeting. My name is Jonathan Platt, and I'm a technical officer for Barbados National Standards Institution, and I will be your moderator for this morning. And just for those who weren't present, we just want to give you a quick overview, a very brief overview of what you may have missed on the day one. Now, opening comments was from Derek Omar, the CEO of CREEBC. Now, he set the tone for the town hall meeting by highlighting the historical development of the CARICOM Regional Energy Building Code 2018. And Mr. Elson Jordan, in his opening comments, mentioned what are we being welcomed to? He invited us to come inside the conversation and understand the purpose, and thereby highlighting the Sustainable Development Goals, the 5 Ps. This led very nicely into the presentation that was highlighted by Mr. Churchill Norbit. And firstly, he commended all 15 member states for their involvement in the development of the CARICOM Regional Energy Building Code. And thereafter, he obviously referred to the compliance option. As part of the design discussion at the embryonic stage, when we're planning to build a building, he mentioned that the design must be appropriate with regards to the building code. He also defined for us the residential building. What is a residential building? He provided that nice definition for us. And then he looked into the semi-condition compliance path. What is needed to be considered? And therefore, he referred to Table 1 as a checklist to demonstrate compliance of the code. 3 requirements was highlighted as outlined in R401.2.1 of the code. He used the acronym SHCG, which may have been foreign to us, but it was very clearly identified and articulated, meaning that the solar energy gain coefficient, and we explained that quite well for us. He explained that high performance windows would be needed, and that he also explained the projection factor with regards to shading. And this really culminated quite nicely with the Q&A question and answer session. And this is where we encourage you all to play your role, to look at the bottom of the sheet. And this time we can perhaps look at the housekeeping. All right, thank you. So if you can see there, the housekeeping, it says, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type questions and comments for the speakers and or the moderator's attention. We encourage engagement amongst yourselves, utilizing the chat function during the session. So if you want to talk, you can do, but we encourage, if you have questions, to use that facility. A short poll will be issued to engage with you during the presentation. Your participation is very welcome. This seminar is being recorded and streamed live on CrossCube's YouTube page. So thank you for that. So let's invite now the presentator, is Ryan Cobb. Now, he was educated, he has a MSc. He has a MSc in Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency from the University in John Carlos in 2017, a mechanical engineer from the Institution of Brazil as well. Ryan Cobb is an energy director in the Ministry of Public Utilities, Energy Logistics since 2017, where he has been employed since 2013. Prior to becoming an energy director, he was an energy officer in charge of policy and planning. Mr. Cobb began his career in the private sector as the only commercial crude extraction company in Belize, Natural Energy Limited it was called. Now, during the period working at BNE from 2011 to 2013, Mr. Cobb worked at different stages of production until ultimately working at the control room operations, overseeing stages of operations from the field work up to loading crude onto oil tankers for international shipping. Mr. Cobb is a mechanical engineer by trade, obtaining his bachelor degree in Cuba before pursuing a postgraduate degree in the university in Madrid. At the Ministry of Public Service, Utilities, Ryan is in charge of planning and policy development. Along with these duties, he is also a focal point for several Latin American, Caribbean, international organizations, such as PROCAT, Mesoamerica, ISCAN, OLAD, and of course, CARICOM, to name just a few. Please, let us pay keen attention to Ryan Cobb as he presents the commercial implications of the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code. Ryan, you have our full attention.
Thank you, Mr. Platt, and good morning to everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for showing your keen interest in learning more about the CARICOM Regional Energy Building and Codes. And today, what I'll be doing is just giving you basically a snapshot of what those implications are for the commercial sector. So I'll begin to share my screen. Can anybody confirm that they're seeing my PowerPoint slide?
Excuse me, Ryan, before I forget, there's one little thing I've forgotten. So we just want to do a quick short poll, if I may. So if they could put up the poll first, we just want to get their feedback first, and then we can go into your presentation. So forgive me for that. So the poll is only going to be up for a few moments. That was quick enough, yeah. Just for a few minutes, and then we'll see the results of the poll straight away. So please fill it in if you can. It's only 3 questions. All right, I think that should be sufficient time to capture some of the results. Let's see. Okay, so straight away we can see from the first question, have you heard about the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code prior to this webinar? We can see a large proportion said yes, 89%. And where have you heard about the CREEB? And we can see the substantial amount of us have heard from the national standard bodies, which is 58% of us. And lastly, does your country have a building code? We scroll up a little bit, yes, and it says, well, it's very impressive, 64%, and the country does have an energy efficiency code. So please, let's continue our presentation. Brian, thank you for allowing me to come in there and disturb you. Sorry about that. So let's continue. Thank you, Brian. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Platt. So, yes, as I was stating, the goal of this is simply for a formularization of the of public and those involved within the commercial industry to understand a little bit of the implications of what this building code is within the commercial sector. But before we begin, first we must understand what are commercial buildings. And the answer to that is quite easy today because of the presentation by Mr. Churchill yesterday. Quite simply put, a commercial building is any building that is not classified as a residential building. So if we go back to yesterday's presentation, would have showed us that a residential building is any detached family dwelling or townhouse, or any building that's used for residential purposes that is 3 stories or less above grade plane. So any buildings that do not fall within that criteria are classified as commercial buildings. But how about those buildings that have dual purpose? Those buildings that serve both as residential and commercial buildings, as many of the buildings within our region occasionally do. Usually whenever you have a family store, you may have a family store and you live on subsequent floors above that. Well, the way the codes are applied is that for each section of that building, you would apply the respective codes. So for the residential section of that building, you'd apply the residential codes. And for the commercial buildings, you would apply the commercial codes. Of course, all of this still has to meet the criteria of the previous slide, whereas that if the building is above 3 stories, then all commercial buildings regulations and codes have to be applied. So you may say, well, how is it or why is it necessary to apply these codes in these buildings? Well, as you can see from this slide, energy consumption within commercial buildings or all buildings for that matter of fact are made up primarily of lighting and conditioning, space conditioning requirements. And we'll go through each one of these later on during the presentation as well. What are the implications? What are the forms? And how do we do the compliance for the different sections? So the intent of the code itself is to conserve energy over the useful life of each building, promote flexibility innovation, and this code does not overwrite any other pre-existing codes within the country or region of application. While this may be the outlay of the intent within the code itself, ultimately what the code is trying to do is get best value for money. What do I mean for that? I mean, you create the best living conditions, the best interaction conditions, the best business conditions for value of money. So ultimately what we're trying to do is save money for the type of work that the building is doing. Of course, for the implementation of these codes, we must all prepare the various construction documents that are required in order to submit to your local authorities. These documents must be very specific and have sufficient detail to determine the compliance of each building. The information in these documents must include, but are not limited to, the thermal envelope of the building, the air filtration, the mechanical systems, water heating services or systems that they may have, and the electrical and lighting controls. As you may have seen from a previous slide, the electrical and the mechanical systems make up the majority of the energy use of a building. So all other components are basically to help with that as well, to help to reduce, not the percentage, but definitely the amount of energy that you use in these systems. So this is just a little bit more detail of the different types of information that would likely be found on these construction documents, which would include things such as insulation, U factors, your penetration, your heating controls such as the economizers, your ducting, and any type of daylight controls that you may have for both interior and exterior lighting. As seen in the presentation from yesterday, when we're talking about the envelope, we're talking about that red line that we have here that surrounds and should seal off any conditioned space. So within this diagram here, you can see that these are the areas specifically inhabited by either residents or by people visiting various establishments to conduct business or for commercial purposes. These do not include areas such as attics or non-traffic storage areas that do not need to be conditioned. But in order to design, first we must classify what are the different parameters that we need to design for. And this is all based on the different climatic zones that exist within our region. Within our region, there exists three climatic zones. Zone 0, which is called tropical. Zone 1, very hot. And Zone 2, mildly hot. This can be seen more clearly within this table here, which are all included within the handbook, where you can easily identify what are the different climatic zones for your region. For example, I am currently residing in Belize, and Belize is considered a tropical zone. So you can see here on the CZ, it is 0A. So Belize is considered as tropical zone 0. When designing for cooling, we have certain parameters that we must adhere to. For interior design conditions, the minimum or the maximum cooling that we should design towards is 24 degrees centigrade, and for heating is 22 degrees centigrade. So these are the parameters that are used to both test and certify that your buildings are in compliance with the standards. It does not mean that the building cannot cool beyond that or cannot heat beyond that, but those are your design parameters. You must also, your building materials are also important. And within your building materials must come the labeling so that your contractors know what are the different types of insulation and U factors that they are using within the construction zones. Those apply to both the traditional, such as blow-in insulation, or those that you may use to cover the walls so as to increase your insulations on your walls. Your windows and doors also now go through this requirement. Previously, as had been said in yesterday's conference, we had typically gone to picking windows and doors by just the design, how aesthetically pleasing and functional they were. Well, now we must go a bit further than that and look into the thermal capacities of these different utilities. We must look if they have any type of glass. We will look, see if they're glazed, double walled, and even your doors, see if they match these criteria as well. So within this code, as also is the case with residential buildings, there are three ways of being in compliance. One is the prescriptive sections, where it details what are the what are the effects or what needs to be implemented when it comes to the various areas included in the code, or a total building performance where you both have mandatory and modeling scenarios that can be used to determine if the entire building is in compliance. And you also have the ASHRAE standard, which will be done in more detail in tomorrow's session. So to go into a bit more detail within the prescriptive sections, as we had stated, it is broken down into various components: your envelope or your thermal envelope, your mechanical systems, your heating, your lighting, and you also include additional efficiencies such as either a more efficient lighting, more efficient ACs, or renewable, the inclusion of renewable energies such as solar, wind, heat pumps, to that effect. So once we go into let's go into the building envelopes. So when we talk about the thermal envelope, we are specifically talking about structures such as the roof, the walls, the vertical fenestrations and skylights. Once again, fenestrations are all those exterior walls that have doors, windows, skylights. Those are what are classified as fenestration. We must also importantly look at your floor assembly. Is your floor assembly properly insulated? And when we talk about insulation, we're not talking just about things such as bone insulation, but it goes into the type of concrete that you also use for those types of floor assemblies, such as ground floor and even your intermediate floors. So the prescriptive path compliance will tell you what are the requirements for your installations. They tell you what are the thermal requirements for your roofing, for your fenestrations, and also what are the permittable allowances for your air leakages. So here we have an example of the type of installations that certain establishments may want to use for the roofing. So as you can see here, they are putting in slabs of insulation over the metal corrugated roofing. We also have solar reflectance and solar emittance for those, specifically for those types of metal roofing. And for skylights, these are also considered fenestrations as well. What are the acceptable limits for those and treatments that needs to be on those types of structures? When we go into air filtrations, we're talking about your air leakages, your barriers, your air intakes, because one thing that a building needs to do is also needs to do air exchanges. You need to ensure that you have proper levels of fresh air coming into the building, so as to have proper levels of oxygen and releasing those harmful carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide types of gases back out into the atmosphere. This also covers areas such as vestibules, which are those areas that are in between your outer door and your inner door. So these are usually whenever you step in the building and you feel that rush of air that comes onto you before actually getting into those buildings. These are what are considered the vestibules of the building. So your air leakages are normally tested by positive pressure. Usually you pressurize an area, and over time you measure how that pressure trails off, if it trails off, and what are the permissible levels for those pressures to go down. Under your barrier constructions, any types of plumbing or electrical that goes in between floors or goes in between buildings, these needs to be properly sealed off, not just insulated, but properly sealed off so that there's no air leakages between these cracks and crevices as well. The use of thermal cameras is a very useful tool when you start to look at very large buildings. Here you can see you can determine if there are any types of air leakages just through your thermal devices. You'll be able to detect hot and cold spaces, and that's usually where you can determine if it's a heated area. Well, heated air is coming out. If it's a cool area, you'll notice very cool spots, specifically around either it's doors, windows, or service panels, things to that effect. One area that's not often looked at, but is vitally important, is loading dock areas. If these areas are conditioned areas, they need to ensure that they have weather seals, because they too form part of that thermal envelope and air leakage envelope. Here again, we have a demonstrative view of what those vestibules are. It's those areas, like I said, of entering, the first door of entering the building, and the other door of just going into now what is the trafficked area of the building. Recessed lighting is very important, as is the case with the residential building. Recessed lighting has to be proven against air leakages. They need to be energy efficient. So the lumens per watts are also described, not for the individual lights itself, but for the lighting of the area that it's currently housed in. All of these, the labels, the different allowances, all of these can be found within the handbook. That's one of the reasons why I'm just going quickly through this slide, so that everybody could have a good understanding of what the entire imposition is of these codes. Then we come to the mechanical and service hot water areas. So these are systems that are used to either heat and cool and ventilate the buildings are. This also includes your walk-in refrigerators, your walk-in doors, both your for both your commercial applications, such as your retail houses where you have your display cases, and for the storage areas where you have your deep freezers for things such as your meats and other products. So there are mandatory provisions when it comes to these systems. You have to do your proper load calculations, your proper sizing, your ducting, your sealing off of the ducting, and also your ventilation. What are your required ventilations, your CCFs, your cubic feet per second. And these applies to both single zone systems for those small commercial entities and those mixed entities where you have residential and commercial, where you may have separate systems, which then they are classified as single zone systems. And you have your multiple zone systems, which then, of course, either cool or heat different floors or areas within a commercial building. Again, all of these are detailed within the manual. You could say the Bible for the heating or for the cooling industry is the ASHRAE standard. So that is referenced there. And these are your economizers, your heating elements, which must also be calculated and prescribed within your planning documents. We must also look at the different controls for these systems. We must look at the different thermostatic controls, your on-off controls, whether they be automatic or be based on smart systems, which can detect either how cool the area is or how the air quality of the area. What many of the new systems are starting to look at is, instead of exchanging air on a timely basis, on a scheduled basis, these new systems now come with sensors that detect oxygen levels, detect CO2 levels, CO levels, and they determine if it's safe either to recirculate or need to exchange for fresh new air from outside. These controls are also applied to the vestibules and also applied for your demand control ventilation, because the cooling and heating requirement is quite different when you have a 10% occupancy that compared to an 80% occupancy. So all these demand controls are prescribed and demanded so as to alleviate these types of circumstances. Here again, we have an example of the demand-controlled ventilation, specifically used in large arenas, conference halls, and one that we may have seen on our various travels, which is the automatic cutoff of AC systems in your hotel rooms. These work with smart keys, where as you enter a room, you place your key card in there, and that activates basically the electrical system of your room. That allows you to turn on the lights, allows you to turn on your HVAC and heating system. And whenever you leave a room, you typically take out the key, and 15 minutes or maximum of 30 minutes later, the room automatically shuts off. Of course, other rooms can program this to be within whatever parameters they want. Can be less than 30 minutes, but the code mandates that it must be within that 30-minute period. It has to be maximum of 30 minutes. Here again, we have it that there are certain prescriptive measures for your walk-in coolers or walk-in freezers, your warehouse freezers, also your display cases for your retail commercial entities. Here we have for your service water heating, which would supply your restrooms, your showers, your kitchens, your pools, your spas. And again, we have the different codes that then give you your prescriptive compliance codes towards these different systems, including those that are for pools and spas. Lighting. Lighting is one of the most crucial systems. It's where most of, apart from HVAC, is the most energy intensive sector within any buildings. So these include both interior and exterior lighting, the different controls that you may have, the maximum density. So it's the lumens per watts per square feet that you'd have within a building. But when it comes to lighting, you may say, well, I am looking to retrofit an old building. Do I need to apply these new standards? And the short answer is yes. Whenever you are retrofitting or changing the purpose of a building, these codes, these commercial codes within the CREEBC are applied. And you'll be able to find all the details as to what level you need to apply all of these codes within the handbook. So the handbook itself is a very wise investment for not just contractors, but for operators of commercial buildings as well. Within lighting, we make a use of occupancy sensors. So those are the sensors that once you leave a room, they would automatically turn on or off, or very helpful within a warehouse, where they detect in what specific area you are and light that immediate area that you are in. And as you walk into various areas, then the lighting conditions change based on the occupancy. You have your timing controls as well. And you have your lighting reduction control. So this is your either your dimming, or you're turning on and off certain areas within a specific area, lighting appliances within a specific area. You also have lighting that are based on the daylight. So those would be the areas that have vestibules in it, that has vestibules, but also that has large amounts of windows and transparent doors. So based on the sunlight that comes in within the building, these lighting conditions automatically change in response to the amount of light that's coming from the outside. We must also have control over our exterior lighting. And here, once again, we just show what are the different requirements for both your interior and how typically this would be viewed within your documentation and your plans. Within your exterior lighting, you have your power requirements. You have certain exceptions listed within code. So you are allowed certain things such as lighting for safety, exit signs, arenas, signage. So those are all provided for within this document. Then we look at the additional energy efficiency packages. As I stated in the beginning of the presentation, this looks at your AC or HVAC systems that are much more efficient, because within the code, you are prescribed certain efficiency. But nowadays, there are a lot of systems that comes and go beyond that limit, that are much more energy efficient. So the code makes provisions for the implementation of these systems, for your lighting controls, for your heating, for your air filtration, again, and like I stated in prior, which are your oxygen sensors, your CO2 sensors, and so forth. You're also looking at your enhanced digital lighting controls, and of course, on-site renewable energy. Whether that be pictured here solar, but you could use things such as wind or heat pumps. And of course, you have, now we go into your total building compliance. As we had stated before, within your total building compliance, there are both mandatory and simulated performance, which are basically computer simulated designs that allow you to rate if your building is in compliance or not. So there are trade-offs when it comes off to total building compliance. You can make trade-offs between your various systems, whether that be your envelope, your HVAC, your ventilations, your lighting, because you're not now testing each and individual system, but you're treating everything as one system. So that's why it's the total building performance. But although there are leeways between those systems, there are certain mandatory requirements that come within that as well. Those mandatory requirements, those include your annual energy use, the list of the building features, the output showing total use, how the space is being used, and whatever errors that you may have received during the simulation of those buildings. And based on that, then you have to write in and explain why is it that these errors were being received and what were the remediations that were done in order to alleviate those error messages. So in short, those are the implications of the implementation of this regional energy efficiency building code within the commercial sector. So I'll turn it over back to Mr. Platt to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Ryan. You finished ahead of time. Wonderful. Great work. We really did appreciate your presentation there. We're just going to have a look and see if there's any expressions there in the Q&A. So please, we encourage you, if you have any questions, please use the Q&As at the bottom of your screen and pose any questions that you may have for Ryan. You know, Ryan, it's interesting that this code is probably new to a number of persons. And one of the things I was interested in is we're in a hot climate generally, but yet we're using insulation. And it's one of the requirements for cooling. So perhaps you can just expand upon that. It sounds a bit of a contradiction, but for those that don't know, it's something that can actually improve our energy efficiency.
Yes, so the way insulation works both is not a one-way street. Insulation works in both directions. So it keeps heat from entering your building, and it also allows or keeps or prevents cool air from escaping your building. So it keeps cool cooler and keeps hot hotter in the most simplest of terms. The use of insulation is one of the most value for money that any builder can do in any type of building, whether that be commercial, residential, or even things such as sheds, because you don't need to use what you would call either spraying insulation or purposely built insulation. Because nowadays we even have things, let's say you're building a shed, but you'll be in your shed quite fairly because you are a hands-on person. Let's say you like to do your woodwork. They now sell these walls that come with styrofoam in between. What that helps with is that helps to keep hot air or from entering your building. It keeps the building cooler, although you may not have any HVAC system within that building itself.
Yes, thank you, Ron. We have a question, and they're now coming in. Are vegetables really a requirement in our climate, given the low temperature difference between inside and outside temperatures? That was from an anonymous person.
Okay. What the issue with vestibules is that vestibules allows the least exchange of air between outside and inside whenever people are entering your building. That's the purpose of a vestibule. So you do not need to implement a vestibule if you can ensure or demonstrate that your building still meets those energy requirements that are stipulated within the code. Now, the implementation of a vestibule allows you to easier calculate or easier ensure the compliance of that energy efficiency within the building, because you do not have that exchange of cold air with hot air various times in the day.
Thank you very much. Just had a comment here from Miguel. He mentioned that beach coolers are the best example of insulation. They have white tops to reject the heat and insulation all around. So that's a good example then of an insulation that we all carry around. We've got our beers in there. We know why we want it cool. So it's a nice illustration. Thank you, Miguel, for that. We have another question there from David Clark, and now the questions are now coming in. But yeah, it's Mr. Cobb. My question is, when will the CARICOM Energy Building Code Efficiency Code will come into effect? When would it come into effect? So that's an interesting question.
Sure, yeah. So essentially, the CARICOM Energy Building Codes are in effect right now because they were approved by the ministers of COTED, which are the ministers of the Caribbean that are involved in all events within the Caribbean region. Now, I think the better question would be, how easily or when will it be enforced within my region? That is where both CARICOM and CrossQ are currently working at. We're working at to see how to best equip the different building authorities, the different bureaus of standards within the different countries. So one, first is the visibility to ensure that everybody at least knows of these building codes. Two, increase that capacity so that people are knowledgeable of how to implement the building codes. And then we go into enforcement to ensure that the building authorities have that capacity to go about enforcing those building codes as well.
Thank you. We have three other questions that I really want to bring in. So I guess you'll have to be concise with your answers. But one of the questions from Ian Weeks is, for clarification, are there specific codes based on the type of businesses activity? And if so, what are those categorized of commercial, business, or types? I guess, if you do you understand the question there, Ryan?
Yes. So basically what they're asking is, if I have a commercial center or if I have an office center, are the codes any different? The quick question is no, because the codes is an overall code for all commercial entities. What changes is the types of systems that you put in it. If you're going to put in a centralized cooling system, then you go to the code and you reference that specific type of system that you will be implementing.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Another question, does the code address factors of water conservation and waste management to inform the energy efficiency design and development of commercial buildings? That's a wonderful question.
Okay, so that's a good question. To my knowledge, it doesn't specifically address water conservation because within this code that would have been considered non-treated water, unless in the case of the heating elements, where then it's not so much of how much water you're using, but the efficiency of or the rate at which you are then conditioning that water. But again, if a country already has a pre-existing code that addresses water conservation and waste, then that code must be applied because this CREEBC does not bridge that code.
Right, thank you. I know Churchill just slipped in there with an answer, not a question, but he mentioned that the CARIB was approved in April 2018 by CARICOM Energy Minister. So that answered the question earlier on. We have another question here. Let me see. Are for these energy requirements different of use in the dry Caribbean countries and the wet Caribbean countries? So I guess he wants to know if there's a difference between the dry and the wet Caribbean countries. Are there a difference in use?
Yes, there are differences in use. At the beginning of the presentation, I would have stated that the Caribbean is basically divided into three different zones. Zone 0, Zone 1, and Zone 2. And these take into consideration whether these countries are dry or wet. So based on those classifications, then you have your different design parameters.
All right, thank you. And another question, I think is, oh, we're still getting some more coming in, but we've got quite a lot coming in now. But is the code available for purchase and where?
So yes, the code is available for purchase. You can actually go to the webpage of the International Code website, and it's available for purchase there. You may also get in contact with your local ministries of energy and your bureaus of standards, and they can also direct you to where you can purchase either the digital code, or maybe they may have physical codes, physical books that you can purchase as well. My preference is always to have a physical copy along with a digital copy as well.
But I've also noticed, though, Ryan, that you can actually physically, electronically see the code and actually peruse the code online. So there's an opportunity, it's available actually online for you to peruse. So which is a wonderful thing. So everybody can get exposure to the code if they so desire, and obviously then decide if they want to purchase or actually get one download permanently. But it is available online. Yeah.
The link for the read-only version was just posted in the chat. So anybody that wants to see that code, they can copy that link and save it for reference later on.
There you go. See, I was correct then. All right. There's another question here again for you. It says, do you think the CARICOM and CrossQ should provide the trainers sessions so as to accelerate the uptake of the code? That's a wonderful question too.
Yeah. So I actually know that both CARICOM and CrossQ are looking into this. So they are definitely looking at to see how we can better improve the capacities within the region. And training trainers is definitely one of the methods that they are looking into.
Yes, thank you. And just an expression from Mark, forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, I think it's Hencart. He just expresses thank you for the question he posed earlier on. Another question, does the code clearly differentiate between requirements for conditioned space and naturally ventilated space? Yes,
the code specifically makes those different requirements and prescriptive interventions.
Right. Seems like we've exhausted. I really did enjoy the fact that we spent more time on the Q&A in the sense of really drawing out the persons here so they can make their expressions. So we really do thank you. I'm just wondering if our time is up right now, or if we've got some more opportunities for some more questions.
There's a hand raised in the audience, Mr. Clark, David Clark.
David Clark, are we able to facilitate that? Maybe because
I want to find out when will the CARICOM new energy code will come into force?
right. You got that, Ryan? When will the energy efficiency building code come into force? I think you had highlighted that somewhere already, but perhaps you can just give some clarity.
Yeah, so the code itself is legally binding right now within the CARICOM, within all CARICOM nations, because as had been stated by Mr. Norbert, that it was approved in April of 2018 by CARICOM energy ministers. Now the implementation and enforcement, that really is dependent on the different island member states and CARICOM member states.
Very good, very true. And you know, each have signed on the agreement of Shakuramas and therefore have to put their legislative framework in place for any standard coming out of the CARICOM that has been approved. So it's really down to each member state to put their framework in place. But yes, it has been approved, as you've mentioned very clearly. Okay, any further questions? Apart from we having some acknowledgement that it was a very good presentation. Well done, Brian. Very good. Just want to speak to the organizers. Have we still got some more time for a few more questions?
Hi, Mr. Platt. We have some more time if anyone has any more questions.
Oh, we're getting the next one. Oh, it's not a question, it's an expression. It says, excellent presentation. And that's from Ian Weeks. Okay, I think the audience has gone quiet. Yeah. Is there any raised hands? Because I haven't had the opportunity to see it.
Hi, Mr. Platt. We have one raised hand, Mr. Ainsley Mills. You could go ahead. You have to unmute your microphone.
Yes, sorry about that. Good morning. That was just an error, but I just want to say excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you again for your expression there. We have a question though from Baptiste. It says, can any of the CREEBC reps speak to future capacity building sessions? I guess they want more training, more exposure.
So let me address. We try.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself firstly? Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Janice Hilaire, and I am the coordinator for resource mobilization and program development at CREEBC, and I also have oversight of the energy portfolio. So as it relates to how or when the codes will be enforced, we've developed the codes and they were approved by the COTED in 2018. So CREEBC as a regional organization, we can urge member states to adopt the codes, but we can't mandate member states to adopt the code. So what happens at the member state level will be determined by the capacity in the member states, whether the code is adopted or not, and whether it becomes mandatory or for a when and if it becomes mandatory, I should say. And that depends on what's happening at the member state level as it relates to capacity. So we've tried to assist in that. We've tried to build a capacity. So from August of last year to March of this year, we provided training to 14 of the 15 member states. We provided training in the code compliance, which would be residential, commercial, and ASHRAE, to industry practitioners, that was done through the bureaus. The bureaus reached out to the various organizations, and 20 persons from each country was trained in that. We also, this is still ongoing, try to provide training to code officials and inspectors in terms of the codes where this training was certified. The curricula for both of the trainings was developed by the International Code Council because we use their base code, the IECC, to develop the 2018 CREEBC. So my response, I say all of this to say that the training to the industry practitioners was done as a training of trainers. And we expect those persons who receive training from ministries of energy, professional associations, engineers associations, architects associations, to be able to go out and advocate and train their peers in that area. So the work that we've done in this area was dependent on the finance that we received from international development partners. For now, we've exhausted that. If we have funds in the future, we will go on and try to do this again. But in the meantime, we hope that we delivered the training in a sustainable manner that persons who received it can go out and train others in that area.
Wonderful, thank you for that expression. That, it just really says that the legacy then is left with the member states to continue this process. So it's a wonderful way that some have already been trained. So we want them to continue to really continue that training with their colleagues as well in industry, to make them fully aware of the implications of the Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code. We have another question from Mark again. Mark, it says, right, do you anticipate that the response of COVID-19 and especially the prevention of contagion in buildings shall impact the current code for internal environment of buildings? That's a very thought-provoking question, and that's a good one to answer. Ryan, you have an answer for that?
So it will have an impact on the building. I wouldn't say it would impact it from the energy side, but definitely within the different materials that we are using. For example, I know here in Belize, within the commercial sector, these large retail buildings that have centralized air conditioning systems, they had to implement more rigorous filtration systems within the HVAC units. So they had to upgrade to the medical grade HEPA filters, so as to be circulating air within the building. But I am not aware of any effects to the design of the systems that would be affected within the code of these, within this code.
We have another question from Ian Weeks. Actually, missed one. We have one from Michael Wood, we know quite well. He mentions, I wonder if you can explain a bit about air leakage, regards to fenestration, doors, windows, etc., from an unaired conditioned building.
Okay. So even if your building is unair conditioned, the requirement for air leakage remains the same. Why? Because you would assumably already have insulated walls and insulated roofs. So you'd still have a leakage of what would be cooler air within your building compared to hotter air outside the building, and vice versa if you're heating.
All right, thank you. We have a question here from Fabian Scott. A serious campaign needs to be urgently followed up and funding to get the CREE qualified code officials in place to conduct the necessary verification of the CREE. Otherwise, the private sector might become jaded that they have invested in the EE building and cannot benefit from the visible or leverage it brings. So in other words, he's really saying we need to get things on board that we can get verification that ones are actually compliant. So how would you answer that then, Ryan?
Well, I believe right here within question and answer, Ms. Latoya is requesting to answer this live.
All right, great.
No, I was just noting that we're answering it live.
Okay, all right. See, you want it, right?
Yes, and I think that is something that both CARICOM and CROSSQ are looking for. As had mentioned a bit before, although there is no current funding right now, they are always continuously looking for funding so as to increase the capacity within the Caribbean region.
Jonathan, if you want, I can also add to that.
Okay, please do.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, there is a measure of awareness that needs to happen with the code, which is what we've been doing, as Janice would have indicated, with funding from various agencies over the past year, going into 2 years now. We're only able to build that kind of capacity where we are actually able to financially support the training of our professionals in the region. In relation to broader awareness, what we can do and what we have been doing is utilizing the media, utilizing our social means, and utilizing our partners to spread the word and to share information as we go on, and that will continue to happen. What I would advise the audience to do, and those who are interested in following the code, what is happening in relation to implementation, what is happening in relation to CROSSQ's own work, is to actually, follow on our socials and also check out our website, energy.crossq.org, for more information. We would have mentioned yesterday that we'll be posting some Q&As and some FAQs as we go forward, and that will continue. So you can keep tuned to that space where we'll be answering the questions that you have, where we'll be posting the most critical questions that we have coming in, or the frequent questions that we have coming in. And we can hopefully, spur the dialogue and keep it going, because where the funders can see that there is the need, then we have a stronger support to be able to actually inspire some financial support towards the initiatives that are of interest to our region. So thank you very much for the question. And back to you, Jonathan.
All right. I'm still conscious of the time, Latoya, sorry. So we still have time for one more question. Well,
we actually have two in the chat, two in the.
All right, two more questions. Great. Yeah. So this is from Churchill. He mentions member states should take the lead on this initiative. Verification typically is done by registered professionals as determined by each jurisdiction. So that's really an answer to a question that was posed. We have another question here. Right. The development of EE code for building is very, I think you put emphasis on very good. Why not make it available to everyone? Why put the price to it? How can the code be made simple for the general user?
As had been placed within the chat, if you go a little bit in the chat, you'll be able to see that there is a link for a read-only version. So you do have access to that code online. But the reason why there is a price to actually purchase it is because the code itself also makes reference to a lot of international codes, and it was done in conjunction with the ICC that have proprietary codes as well. So that is one of the main reasons why there is a price to purchasing the code. But like I had said, there are provisions for you to make references and read the code online.
All right, thank you for that question, Gomez. All right, thank you for the answer, Ryan. Oh yes, there was one, let me see if I missed this question. Over time, with the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, conducted research to speak to the best practices. So will they research and come out with answers with regards to best practices? I think that was the principle of the question there over time? There's a question for you,
So
Ryan.
well, I would imagine that as all codes go through a period where they are reviewed. Principally, they are reviewed by the professionals within the various countries. So that whether that be your association, your different ministries of energy, and your bureaus of standards. So I would imagine that these best practices upon that time of revision will also be included in that revision.
Very true. And when we think about codes or standards generally emanating from CREEBC or even from national bodies, they're not static. In other words, they all have a review opportunity, and therefore they can be massaged, as it were. I think we've really concluded all our questions and answers, and I really do appreciate the participants, those of you in the audience, for really shedding some light and clarity by use of your questions enabled us to do that for you. So we thank you again for posing those questions. We really do thank Ryan for his clear and concise presentation. We know the document is a live document in the sense that we will look forward to it being improved as we go along, but it is new to the region, although it was published back in, when was it again, 2000 and, remind me, Ryan, my head. 18, it was published back in 2000, but it's new to us, and therefore we have to get comfortable with some of the changes we now are expected to make. But as you mentioned, we're getting value for our money. In other words, we want to conserve our money, not just energy, but it would help us down the road as well, as you mentioned in your presentation. So again, we do well to thank you again, Ryan, for your presentation. I believe this really does conclude, and I think, who's this here? Somebody's just made one more point. From Manu, she says, thank you, CREEBC. I asked because I am a professional registered engineer in Bahamas, and at this time, this is the first time hearing of the training. So she's just heard about the training. So we thank you for your expressions and your gratitude there as well. So I believe this concludes. And Latoya, if there's any other further comments we need to make.
Excuse me, Jonathan, Janice
Yes,
here. In relation to your last comment, I would just tell Ms. Ramming that we have 2 publications which support the code, the CREEBC. I think Mr. Cobb may have mentioned. But these 2 publications are one, and somebody did mention something about it. It is a condensed version of the code. It is called the 2018 CREEBC Code Essentials.
Oh, yes.
If you go on to the ICC platform, you would see it there. And the second one, which would be in reference to the training, since the individual was not included in the training, we have a student companion, a 2018 CREEBC student companion, which is supposed to be used as reference to the code, and it looks at various areas where we trained the industry practitioners. So that could be helpful if she would like to review it to see what it entails, since she was not able to participate in the training.
Yes, thank you for that interjection. That's a good idea. So hopefully you can appreciate that and be able to benefit from those publications. It doesn't seem like we should be ending here, Ryan. It seems that we should be continuing. But it says no open questions at the moment, so I guess that's all the questions been exhausted. So back to CREEBC.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Platt. We'd just like to take this opportunity to, thank you for so ably moderating our panel. And to you, Mr. Cobb, for so ably presenting on the commercial implications of the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code. You presented on how to identify our different climate zones. You gave us the design parameters for heating and cooling, cooling at 24 degrees Celsius, or heating at 22 degrees Celsius. You highlighted the mandatory provisions for the building mechanical systems, spoke about sealing and ducting and just all the things that are important to insulation. And one of the things that also stood out to me was the provisions for occupant sensor controls, and you spoke about where they're important, like in the classroom, lounges, storage rooms, and you spoke about the importance of these things to energy and energy efficiency. And for that, we just want to thank you for so ably breaking down the provisions of the CREEBC commercial compliance for us. Thank you so much. To our participants that joined us today, we want to thank you so much for coming out to our webinar. We really hope you learned something today, and we want you to now become advocates for the CREEBC's implementation and utilization in your country. So now that you learn about its importance and the benefits of the code, you can now go and advocate for its implementation and use. If you want to watch this session or rewatch this session, when you're becoming advocates, you can visit our YouTube page, the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality YouTube page. Also, if you wanted to learn more about the CREEBC, you can also visit the CrossQ's Energy website, right? And with that, I just want to thank you so much for joining us and invite you to join us for our next session tomorrow, the last in our CREEBC in a Snapshot session, where we will be looking at the ASHRAE's compliance. We begin at 10 a.m. and you will I know if you can't find the link to register, you can visit our social media pages and come on and join us tomorrow for another wonderful discussion about the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Buildings Code in a Snapshot. Thank you again for joining us, and see you tomorrow.
Just before they go, just remind them to copy that link before we will disappear. So you copy it and paste it on your Word or something so you have it ready, because it will disappear. All right. So thank everybody again, the participants. Ryan, very, very nice presentation, and sure we take it to heart and we'll be able to apply it.
The CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code was developed to help property developers increase the energy efficiency and the upgradability of their building projects. Energy savings help offset the potential higher cost of building your home to code. And enhanced upgradability helps commercial owners increase their competitive advantage, saving money over time. Additionally, lower energy demands during and after the building process can also lead to community and national level benefits like reduced reliance on fossil fuel generated electricity across the construction industry and in homes, lower national fuel import bills, which can free up funding for other critical areas of investment, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So do the maths, play the long game, and help build towards a better future today. For more information on the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, visit energy.crosq.org.